Good morning. It is an honor to be here. And I have to tell you, I'm a little nervous. It's the first time I've ever spoken here before. If you're a visitor, thank you so much for being here. I've got good news and bad news for you in just a minute. But I want to first thank the elders for allowing me to speak today. I am doing both services, so hopefully I'll be good enough in the first that they'll let me do the second. Never know. I do have a lot of things in this presentation, and it's a weaving of science and the Bible, and of course God and Christ. I do have some other ones where if the laws that were given to Israel would have saved millions of lives in the decades and years to come, but that's for another time. For the visitors, I have good news. If you're here, you've come to a wonderful place. I've been here for over a year. It's a great place to be. I will tell you, caring, helping, doing it the right way. If you're here just to visit because of family, thanks for being here. If you're trying to find a new home, definitely give it more than just a chance. The bad news is normally Ryan or Alan would be speaking. They're brilliant. Elders brilliant, guest speakers brilliant. Today, I'm afraid that you don't even have the JV team. You've got the guy that fills up the water for the water boy. So just to let you know, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a geneticist. I don't have a master's of biology. Not a science major, business in college, of course. It was funny, and since we're speaking to kids, I'll say this. I was tested between first and second grade and fifth and sixth grade. Now, my mom was a teacher. She was well known. I grew up in a small town in Iowa called Ames. And they didn't quite understand if I could even read. And I tell you this as kids because everyone learns differently. And so they did all these tests, and they found out that I didn't hear things the same way, that I was never going to be good at memorization. So it's so funny that Ryan had a sermon on jealous, because I'm jealous of people that can remember verses and stuff. I do everything visually. It's all kind of a motion picture for me, and I ask a lot of questions. I knew the bad thing about that whole story is that my mom just told me 2 years ago about what the test results were. I'm like, Mom, don't you think it would have been better if I would have kind of known that growing up? She's like, well, I didn't want you to feel different. I'm like, okay, well, great. Then I'm just gonna feel dumb my whole life. But that's awesome. So I knew early on I wasn't gonna be the smartest in my family. My sister was brilliant. My dad. If you know who I ride home with every day, you know I'm not the smartest one in the truck. So that's how that works. I have been in the medical industry about 21, now going on 22 years, which is hard to believe. I've had the opportunity to speak with every type of doctor on earth except probably eye surgeons. And if you ask the father-in-law, I ask a lot of questions because I try to fill in spaces with pictures. The joke my dad always had was, don't you wish you had that book of 10,000 questions? For Jim when he's growing up, and he, of course, in his Norwegian humor, would say, what will we do next week? So that was kind of me. It doesn't matter who I am. What matters is if I can get you to think. When I do a medical meeting, when I have reps or biotech reps, even when it's a day and a half, if I can get you to think, if I'm in front of a cardiothoracic surgeon or a primary care or an MA, if I can just get you to think a little bit about what I'm speaking about, what's going through your head, I've done my job. And so hopefully, my job today is a man of faith and science. I can really talk fast at times, so I'll try to slow down. I hope that you learn something. I hope it makes you think. I hope that you enjoy it. And I hope as those that are coming up through school and stuff understand that there's two sides to every coin. And what's going on right now is different. I'm going to talk about evolution, mathematical, transitional fossils, genetics, and all kinds of things. I have a spot I'm trying to get to, obviously, and hopefully we'll get there for the second one. Okay, so evolution versus creation. So the old saying, I believe in evolution. I don't have to look back because I have a screen. I'm sorry. I believe in creation. You're wrong. The Bible is just stories. Now what? Well, on the left, you have what's going on now, of course, in a lot of academic circles. You have what I know most of you believe in, and that I know for certain is that God and Christ did make this planet. He creatively designed us. The hard part with the Darwin scheme that we'll talk about is that for whatever reason, this is kind of what they think happened. I will tell you it's absolutely impossible. And the problem is that I love to ask doctor questions even if I don't already know the answer. I always ask them, especially when I'm a hematologist or whatever, one that deals in blood, what would happen if you actually needed blood and you got a transfusion from a monkey? And they give you that look. And really what happens is you die. There's no genetic similarities. Our blood, I'll try to make this, so our red blood cells are like Cheerios, so to speak. And on our Cheerios, we've got a little antigen, which is, we'll just say ours is honey-coated Cheerios. If you put something in that's not that, you have an immune response. And basically, there's different ones. One's a hemolytic, a non-hemolytic. You can have anaphylactic shock. You can have the blood that goes into you that's not supposed to be there that will attack your own stuff. So it just doesn't work. They've tried to think about things. Now, we've had heart valve replacements by pig and cow, bovine, that work. That's great. But as far as that whole transfusion goes, it just doesn't work. They're trying to figure out other ways. They even have some technology they're working on with pig blood. But here's the deal. Our Cheerios, or red blood cells, are made a certain way by God. It has a certain value, it has a certain amount in a volume of blood. Pigs, the apes, whatever else, they have different kinds of Cheerios, and they have more of them or less of them. It just doesn't work. Genetically, it doesn't work. God made the natural laws, He made the spiritual laws, and those are not made to be broken or can be broken. In antiquity is what we call the Dark Ages. Men did not know what they know about humanity and the cosmos. They did know about the lock. They did not know about the lock, but they possessed the key, God. Now they possess the lock in many ways of modern science, but they've lost the key. The proper solution is a union between religion, God and the Holy Bible, and science. The fact is that as science discovers new things and advancements, these are God's thoughts an eternity to go, and what the Bible said thousands of years ago. Until about the 1800s, science and religion were pretty together. Then as we kind of go into the 19th century, you see this. Introduction of Darwin and the theory of evolution, the natural selection. And the sad thing is, if you look all the way through the Bible and what's going on now, men continually worship gods made by man rather than the God that made man. All right? The other thing, too, that I will tell those listening, I don't expect you to get into this huge conversation about evolution, about creation, but it's good to know the backbone in case you do. The one thing in my life that I've always kind of held to is learn to be satisfied with being unsatisfied. And what I mean by that is never stop learning, whether it comes to your Bible studies, trying to understand, whether it comes to something, school, something that you really love, keep on advancing with that. First, the earth. I'm going to give some examples. People once believed that the earth sat on a large animal or a giant's hand. But at the same time, approximately 1500 BC, the Bible spoke of the earth's free float in space. He, God, hangs the earth upon nothing. The earth is round. Scriptures tell us that earth is round. It is He that sits upon the circle of the earth, Isaiah 40:22. The word circle in the Hebrew word, and I won't say this right, shewag, which is translated circuit or compass, depending on the context, that is, indicates something spherical, rounded, or arched, not something that is flat. At the time of Christopher Columbus, 2,000 years later, the world would still believe to be flat. You know, the crazy thing about this is 2% of the entire world still think the world's flat. I'm not kidding you. They have got flat earth societies. They've got flatearth.org. They put a lot of money and time into it. You know, what are you going to do? Oceanography. Psalms was written 8 about 28,000 or 2,800 years ago. Path of the sea was the phrase. Matthew Murray noticed this and considered the father of oceanography. He's noticed this phrase and he decided he was going to find them. He discovered the warm and cold continental currents, and his basic text is still used in colleges today. Bible and ship dimensions. In Genesis 6, God gave Noah the dimensions of the 1.5 million cubic foot ark that he was to build. In 1609 at Horn in Holland, a ship was built after the same pattern, revolutionizing shipbuilding. In 1900, every large ship on the high seas was inclined towards the proportions of the ark. The funny thing is, too, is we continue to make more discoveries in archaeology, which are, I guess, what you'd say sometimes hidden or put to the side or given more emphasis if it looks like it's going to go against God and be more about science. And history is very difficult because, as you know, history changes, and who's ever writing it is kind of the history that you're going to read. I've got a history book set actually that's about 100 years old from the Durants who won the Nobel Prize, and it goes into a lot of different things. It goes up to about the Revolutionary War, but they have in there in 1929, Professor Woolley were digging up ruins in Ur in Mesopotamia at a considerable depth of about 8 feet of silt. At a considerable depth was 8 feet of silt. Now they just kind of surpassed that. They also have sandstone and movement of sand, but they're trying to all kind of push that aside because they don't want to say it's the flood. They want to say it's, as we call it, Mother Earth. So here we are. So the evening and the morning were the fifth day, and then God said, "Let earth bring forth a living creature, according to its kind, cattle and creeping thing and the beast of the earth, each according to its kind." And it was so. And God made the beast of the earth according to its kind, cattle according to its kind, and everything that creeps on the earth according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let him have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over the cattle, and all over the earth, over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female. He created them. The fact of the matter is, as the Creator, God knows more about our bodies, his creation, than we'll ever discover. And we're just really starting in some aspects of understanding how our body works when it has to deal with disease. And I've said this before, Christ healed people, leprosy, blindness, formed bones out of nothing. We're not even close to that. Now we do knee replacements, but that's not the same thing, obviously. We're going to start off with some basics. First of all, we know the Bible is absolute perfection. Greatest historical document ever. We have a hard time actually even getting an article, a book, with the fake news that we're having, anything that you can actually call as true. You have to take everything now, not with just a grain of salt, but almost a bucket of salt, which is sad. But, as one told me, besides the Bible, which we have, a lot of the things that have happened in our world is, 70% of what true history is somewhat classified. And most of the things that were done were kind of behind the scenes. The other thing that someone told me that was pretty, when you think about it as a child growing up, doing the right thing, jobs and everything, most of the most important decisions that are going to be made about you is when you're not in the room. So remember that when you're going forward. Time is made for man, not for God. Time doesn't mean anything to God. His power is without end. For us, we're very bound, seconds, minutes, hours. And I'm looking at the clock right now, and I'm in big trouble. So I'm going to go through some of this a little more quick. God's power, our peanut brains, we cannot understand that. And I'll give you a quick example. If I asked one of the elders, Mitch, to spend $10 million a day to equal our national debt of $21 trillion, it's hard to wrap your head around that. The reason being is if he did it 7 days a week, 365 days a year, he would have had to have been brothers with Cain and Abel to spend all that money until this period of time. That's how big that number is. And the reason I say that is because it's very hard to wrap your head around what that immense power is. We only really understand about 4% of the, or can see about 4% of the universe. Now, the one thing, there's a huge difference between the Fibonacci sequence and coding, which is DNA. Fibonacci is what you see in nature, like seashells as they go around, which is 0 plus 1 is 1, 1 plus 2 is 3, 2 plus 3 is 5, 5 plus 3 is 8, 8 plus 5 is 13, and it kind of goes in that pattern. The reason I put the rest of this is because it's very important on who we are. The RAS system is basically a filter for incoming messages. Ryan alluded to this in one of his lessons about what's in it for me. The amygdala is our emotional center, and the reason I'm saying this is because it has the fight or flight mechanism in it. It's the reason if we're threatened physically or emotionally. And whether it could be even saying something about your religion, it'll hijack you and it'll stop you using your executive part of the brain. The point of this is, why is this important? Because anger actually uses a different part of the brain when you're thinking. And that's why if you get in a fight or if you're having a conflict with your friend and you say something dumb and then after a while you settle down and you're like, why did I say that again? But just something to consider. Obviously the executive frontal cortex is the face center. I told this to Ryan, he kind of looked at me strange, but I really believe that as you look at the brain and how it works, and the Word of God we know turns on that switch. And I really do think that as people learn, hear, read, then that part of the brain, the blood flow, the switch, everything gets turned on. I will tell you that there is something called the Backstop Principle. And the reason I talked about anger and everything else, it's a paper done by Michigan and Georgia Southern, which means no matter what, they will put their foot in the ground and they will not bend or break. And the one argument that I always say on this, because I say common sense, morals, ethics, communications are all dying resources in our world right now. But one of the things that came up, is baptism. And people will put a hard line in that they don't want to be immersed. Now, if I take a step back and just use common sense, I'm like, okay, so, if you think about it, the baptistry, swimming pools, spas, bathtubs, hot tubs, fountains, and all these other things, stream, river, creek, brook, streamlet, runnel, brooklet, bourne, bayou, tributary, distributary, meander, headwaters, gulf, bay, cove, harbors, tarns, oxbow lakes, first, fjords, sound, billabong, kettle, narrows, lee, canal, shoal, oasis, and oceans. So think about how many times people in just this day will get immersed in water. But you're going to take a stand on eternal life. Just common sense would say, why? But a lot of times, that part of that brain will lock people in and they won't go past the point. And it takes work. It takes the ability to kind of break through that, for people to take a step back, to understand, to take the bias out of it. So, the common sense factor. Well, Darwin is like the evolutionist because he liberated science from the straitjacket of observation and opened the door to storytellers. This gave professional evolutionists job security so they could wander through biology labs if they belong there. You can't win a scientific debate with a storyteller who thinks his imagination is equivalent to scientific evidence. Definition of evolution. It's a change in heritable traits in a population over time. The definition of fact, a repeatable observation. Facts are not proven to be true, they are observed to be true. The definition of theory, an explanation for facts. It is not the question of whether X occurs, but why X occurs. Is evolution a theory? Yes. Whenever you use the word evolution as a term for a proposed explanation of why evolution occurs, that is called a theory of evolution. The main theory of evolution accepted by scientists today is Darwin's theory of natural selection. What is natural selection? It is Darwin's theory of why evolution occurs in nature. It's considered by scientists to be the most powerful and elegant theories in the history of science. It can be expressed in a single sentence. In any population, those individuals born with traits that give some advantage in survival or reproduction will tend on average to leave more offspring that have those same traits. That is why evolution occurs to them, so to speak. Members of the population have inheritable variations. In a population, more individuals are produced each generation that can survive and reproduce. Some individuals have adaptive characteristics that enable them to survive and reproduce better than other individuals. An increased proportion of individuals in succeeding generations have adaptive characteristics due to their genetic inherited traits. The result of natural selection is a population adapted to it. This is what they'll go with, and I'll go into more detail. If you go on, and believe me, they have a lot of backing on this. If you look up this, evolution versus creation, you will get more information, more blogs, more people speaking, more papers, more everything. And I'm talking from, is the discussion a debate? Is it a counterpoint? Is it in a group setting? Is it individual? Is it 1-on-3? And it'll all be about how to avoid certain subjects, how to avoid the beginning, how to avoid the distance between fossils, how to avoid all these different questions. So they're well trained. The science community is very well trained. They're very ingrained in this. And that's why when you have a discussion with someone, they have a lot of things that they can pull from, none of it being true, and most of it being avoidance because they don't have answers for this. And one of the examples, if you ever see the program on dogs by Nova, quickly, they try to prove that they could make a dog, basically. For 40 to 50 years, they took the most docile fox, the docile wolf in each litter and bred them with the most docile in another litter. Now they thought this would be surpassing millions of years of evolution. So after 40 years, guess what they came up with? Fox and a wolf, just like they started off with. They didn't get any closer to a dog, but they're trying to say, well, maybe we did it wrong, maybe it wasn't that, but in fact, no, you can't change what's already there. And they were kind of, how would you put it? They weren't upset, but they tried to play it off, I guess is the best way to put it. Well, we're going to start off small, or start off big and go small. So here's our solar system. You can see it in the middle of the sun, the rotation of the planets. Actually, that was a trick. That's actually an atom. My premise with this is, as in our solar system, the planets rotate around the sun, so do the electrons around the nucleus. Now, when you think about what our world is, from the biggest to the smallest, and try to say, you know what, that was just by chance. That was just by coincidence. It's ridiculous. And I'll explain that later. The big thing is that matter just does not begot matter. The God particle, it was created. It had to happen. It had to be from something, by someone. That's one they don't want to go down at all. First, try to think of an explosion that ever produced order. Does a terrorist bomb create harmony? Big bangs or explosions create and cause chaos. How does an explosion cause a rose, a hummingbird, apples, trees, fish, sunsets, seasons, polar bears, thousands of birds, plants, and animals, each with its own unique eyes, mouths, etc.? The latest requires 40 plus parameters to sustain life on our planet. The firecracker story is very basic, and I won't go into the whole thing, but when you light a firecracker back in the day when you were a kid, if it was a ladyfinger or a black cat or whatever, it exploded out and then it stopped. Our universe is continuing to expand. I will tell you this. I'm not smart enough to know how it all started, but I will tell you, the amount of chaos that has happened, the absolute magnitude of it, there's only one thing, one person ever that can create life out of chaos, and that's God and Christ. Whatever you want else, that's as true a statement as I can make. There's no way that, as intricate as we are, how co-functional all our parts are, that we could ever just happen. And I'm going to explain a couple things here that quickly. So the brain by God, an undiscovered country, I say. Small lump of tissue that weighs about 3 pounds. One of the most watery organs in the body, about 85% water. There's no relationship between brain size and intelligence. It feels no pain. It does not have any pain receptors. It floats in a fluid inside the skull, and the fluid derived from blood acts as a shock absorber. The brain stops growing at about age 15. It's covered with folds. Pretty simple, huh? We know that we do a lot of stuff still. I call it the undiscovered country, but we still do a lot of brain mapping. We still have barnstorm auditories type things. We look at carotid and plaque. We have CAT scans and CT scans, MRIs, PET scans, all kinds of things to try to look at it. Oh, I do have to show you this. So never order something on Amazon when you think you're getting something and you're listening to a call. So I plugged in, I wanted to have a brain as an example. So I put in brain actual size, sponge, one piece, and hit buy. So I got my thing, and there it was. $6.95 from China. Now apparently this is the size of my brain. So, always be careful what you're doing. So it's a little bit more complex, I'm afraid. If it were laid out, it would cover 2 student desks. The brain has 4 times as many nerve cells as there are people on Earth. It has 10 billion neurons. It can record 86 million bits of information each day of your life. Protecting the neurons are about 100 billion glial cells. I'm going to go through this. The brain laid out end to end are about 45 miles, the nerves. If the dendrites which are short extensions, I always try to tell people to think of spider webs, but then about 1,000 times smaller. And they are clustered close. The nerve connections, the axons, were laid out side by side. It would encircle the Earth many times over. The dendrites alone, end to end, are 100,000 miles. Now, we have come a long ways in things. We are understanding now about seizures and epilepsy, brain development. We know that a lot of times we thought it was just one place for, let's say, seizure. It was 1 ping, 2 ping, 3 ping, 4, 5 ping, 6 ping. But actually we now know it crosses hemispheres. We know that it can go 1 ping, 2 ping. We know that the way we think, surprisingly, men and women, men kind of go back and forth on one side, pretty slow. Women, we're just lost. Come on, guys, we're always like 2 steps behind the dance on that. I always say behind every good man is a great woman. I think that's it. I'm really trying to get to a point. The eye. Strongest muscles in the body within the eye. Everything within the eye is co-functional. It's an incredibly complex creation. Thousands of co-functional parts, that I said. How did the eye evolve if all the function had to be present at once to give any work at all? It adjusts to focus to different distances, emitting different amounts of light. It corrects spherical and chromatic aberrations. Your eye moves about 100,000 times a day and has 1.37 million light-sensitive cells. This is not by chance. Darwin, just so you know, and I'm giving this background for people so they understand the other side of it. Darwin was an amateur geologist. Natural selection was acting on a natural selection intelligence on random variations. One question you can always ask is how many mathematical equations were in Darwin's theory? The answer is 0. That'll throw him off a little bit. He did some studies. He studied finches. It got all drawn out with beak size and seeds and everything else, and they realized that later it didn't have anything to do with it. I will tell you that this theory that was put together, there's about 50 books on it that says he didn't actually come up with it. There's also some things before that were come up with. His cousin or uncle also was a geologist that came up with some stuff. If he did it or not, it really doesn't matter at this point. They formed a scientific theory with no evidence, basically. And the craziest part is the academic world and true sciences ran with it. Remember, mutations have never made any creation better. And I'll talk about that when we talk about, I'm trying to get to DNA for this, the second one. Changes in anything that was already there is put into our DNA, into our coding by God. You don't have something that changes and that makes us better. It does not happen. Mutations are within genes, and it's a whole different thing. All right, we will not go on that one. Let's just do this quick example of evolution, and then I'll stop. So let's take a bird, all right? And the crazy thing about this, if you look at the tree of life with evolutionists, you'll see a T-Rex at the bottom, and you'll see a hummingbird at the top. I'm not kidding you. Like, everything just kind of gradually went from that to that. But for a bird, did the bird breathe? Did it breathe before the lungs developed? How did it do this? Why did the bird evolve lungs if it was perfectly happy without them and could survive without them? How did it know what to evolve if its brain had not evolved? How did the bird have a mouth? How did it eat before it evolved a mouth? Where did the mouth send the food before the stomach evolved? How did the bird have energy? If the bird didn't eat, it didn't have a mouth. How did the bird see what there was to eat before the eyes evolved? Evolution, and I'm stopping here because I'm over time and I'm very sorry about that. Evolution is an intellectual suicide. It's an embarrassment. And the second one, I'm going to get into how intricate our DNA is, the mathematical probabilities of this happening, what they try to push on us on the other side. So let me say this. If you have any questions or doubts about any of this, you have a ton of people, the elders, Ryan, Alan, a lot of people that can help you out, whether it's this type of thing, anything spiritually. And if you do, just come forward as we stand and sing.